Chapter 31. Magic and Machine. Harbin arrived in the court of Queen Titania of the Elves of Argoth. He had been surprised to discover that the island had its own queen. Indeed, he had been surprised to discover that the island was inhabited by more than trees and multicolored slugs. Nothing from his earlier scouting showed clearings, wood fires, or any of the normal trappings of civilization. But these elves were not normal. They lived in the trees themselves, and had somehow bent them to their own wills. Great cathedrals of open space had been nurtured in the center of the woods, and the elves made their homes among the branches. The court of Titania was the greatest of those cathedrals, and banners of green, gold, and white dripped from the branches overhead. Harbin had set down his flight of ornithopters in a clearing about a half-mile away. He was greeted by a small army of elves, dressed in armor made of varnished reeds and armed with razor-tipped bone spears. Darting among the warrior elves were pixies, small humanoids with dragonfly wings, and behind the lines of elves were centaurs and treefolk, giant-like creatures who looked very much like the forest that surrounded them. Among the armed guard was a single tall elf, almost as tall as Harbin himself. He was dressed in green and white robes that seemed to swirl around him like a cloud. He held his hands out, palms upward. Harbin returned the gesture. In Argivian, the elf said, "You are to come with us. No harm will fall upon you while within Titania's power. I am her speaker." The voice was clipped and precise, another surprise for Harbin. The elves they had fought to date had their own language and showed neither the ability to nor the interest in communicating, only in fighting, tooth and nail, for every piece of land on the island. The raids had begun almost immediately after Harbin's landing and grew in intensity with each passing month. The short towers were under assault almost immediately, and the work crews were victims to snipers as soon as they entered the forest proper. It had become necessary to clear the land within a mile of each tower, and even that was a difficult operation. Often the forest itself would begin to grow back unless the brush was regularly cleared and burned. Then came the major assaults of elves, centaurs, and treefolk. There were massed battles against crudely armed beings who fought with the passion of raging animals. There were animals among them as well, cougars, wolves, and other wild creatures. At first Harbin thought the armies drove the animals before them, but soon he realized the elves exerted some measure of control over the mindless creatures, much as the Argivians did over their machines. They would make lightning strikes from the tree line, then fade into the forest once Argivian forces arrived. Those who pursued the elves beneath the canopy of green were ambushed. Battlements surrounded the towers, and stockades of newly hewn lumber were set up a reasonable distance from the ever-advancing frontier. Heavy, modified ornithopters, now called ornibombers, strafed the jungles to clear it of wildlife and elven raiding parties before the lumbering machines even rolled forward. Slowly, the resources were pulled from the land and poured into making more stockades, battlements, and machines. The losses were horrible, both of men and machines. The Argivians rarely saw their opposition, and then suddenly they appeared, a huge horde of elves, or a flight of pixies, or an army of treefolk. A group of the last had reached one of the short towers and was shredding supply boats before the Argivians realized the treefolk burned the same as any other tree. One morning the attacks stopped as quickly as they had begun. 7 days later an elf appeared at the doors of the stockade, unarmed and carrying a scroll. Harbin himself was at that fort and ordered the guards to open the gates and allow him to parley with the elf, but to be ready to shut them should it prove a trap. It was not. The elf extended the scroll, and Harbin took it from her. It was a map to a location a few hundred miles inland. A note attached, in fluid script, stated that if he wished to parley, he should appear at that location at a certain location and time. Harbin nodded to the messenger. The elf took a step back and turned to go. She hesitated for a moment, and Harbin almost swore she was going to say something herself. But she only shook her head, and walked back to the tree line. The moment she passed beneath the shadows of those trees she was gone. The time given was not sufficient to relay word back to Penregan, and, after some concerns, Tawnos allowed the young man to go to the meeting but insisted he take a flight of ornithopters with him. Now the speaker led Harbin beneath the trees and into the court of Titania. He had left 2 men behind to guard the ornithopters and took 2 with him. But if the queen violated her word of safe passage, it would matter little whether they were together or apart. They were preceded and followed by pale elven warriors, their faces painted with chalk. The procession was flanked by other races that watched as they marched by. Once Harbin swore he saw a human face among the crowds, but it was gone and he could not pause to find out. At last they were let into the great cathedral itself, bathed in green light from the leafy canopy overhead. The ground was firm and even, much of the land beneath the trees was boggy and uneven, slowing their work even further. A long processional was cleared, flanked by still more elves and pixies, straining to look at the invaders. Near the front were humans dressed in brown robes and hoods. They looked daggers at Harbin as he passed. At the end of the processional was a great dais, its steps rising to a white marble platform that ended in a throne as green as the heart of the forest. Seated on the throne was the queen herself. Her beauty was unearthly. No, Harbin realized, her very being was unearthly. Her face seemed like a jade mask, narrow and pointed at the chin. Her form was lithe and lean and, if she were to stand, she would be taller than Harbin. She was decked in tendrils and vines, the brilliant yellow-green of new shoots, but her eyes were deep, old, and unfathomable. The speaker motioned for Harbin to remain at the base of the dais and took a position 2 steps up and to one side of the queen. Titania's face tightened as she regarded Harbin, and the man had the feeling she was mentally peeling away his flesh to get a look at the soul beneath. It was not a pleasant sensation. There was a silence for a moment. Then the queen spoke, and her words were music. Harbin realized her tongue was related to the elven languages he had heard before as chamber music was related to barbarian chants. Her voice transfixed him and held a fire all its own. The speaker said in his clipped tones, "I speak for Queen Titania. Titania speaks for the goddess Gaia, most bountiful and all-powerful. Argoth is under the protection of Gaia and home to her children. You are not welcome here, and you should leave." For all the soft trills, it was a blunt message. Harbin responded, "I bring the welcome of the combined kingdoms of Argiv, Corley, and Yatia, its king and people. I bring the welcome of the Lord Protector of the realm, Urza the Master of Artifice. I am Urza's son, Harbin. Speak to me as you would to him." The speaker relayed the message to Titania, and Harbin wondered why the vine-clad woman smiled for a brief instant. Then she spoke again, and the speaker translated. "She knows who you are and what you are," he said. "She wants to know if you understand what she just said." Harbin took a deep breath. "Tell her I have heard her words. But also tell her that our people will not leave this island." Again, the words were relayed, and Titania's response was short, like a dagger thrust. "Then your people will die here," said the speaker. "You have despoiled the land and must be punished. That is Gia's law." "If I may," said Harbin, raising an empty hand. "Titania should know that my people need the lumber on your shores and the minerals beneath your hills. We are at war against a greater, darker power and need every resource we can muster." The speaker did not even wait to translate this, but merely repeated, "She knows who you are and what you are. You are not welcome here, and you must leave." Harbin raised his other hand. "My father's brother threatens all our land with great machines of mass destruction. Without the lumber and ore to protect ourselves, we will be destroyed. With our destruction, Mishra will find your land and destroy it as well." The speaker translated, and Queen Titania remained silent on her throne, her face impassive. Harbin had expected a more immediate reaction. Then it occurred to him. Queen Titania was not truly present in this great hall. The beautiful creature before him was a mannequin, A puppet operated from afar. It looked truly alive, but it was nothing but vines and wood. Was the unseen Titania considering his words, or was she busy elsewhere, conferring with advisors? Finally Titania spoke, and the speaker's face tightened as he listened. To Harbin he said, "Your enemy has already found our land. He has landed on the western shores with a force as great as your own. Like you, he is already despoiling the land that he touches." "It is as I told you," said Harbin. "He has great and powerful engines of destruction." "And how are they different from your engines of destruction, human?" said the speaker, without relaying the message to his queen. Harbin fumed for a moment, then said, "Tell your queen that if she will ally with us, we can defend her against Mishra." The speaker paused for a moment, then relayed the message. The response was short and guttural, and Harbin did not really need the translation. "She says, 'No thank you,'" said the speaker diplomatically. Harbin was exasperated. "You don't understand. Unless you ally with us, unless you allow us to harvest some of your resources, Mishra will sweep across your land. Only as an ally can you hope to Shuri." Harbin was cut off by a long, tremorous outburst from the queen. Her face was filled with anger, and Harbin marveled for a moment at how lifelike the mannequin seemed. "The dwarves of the Sardian mountains were your allies," said the speaker. "Where are they now?" Harbin was stunned. "How do you know of the Sardian dwarves?" he blurted. "The goddess Gia knows all. She speaks to Titania," said the speaker. "Titania speaks to me. Where are your former allies?" "I never heard them called allies," said Harbin, recovering. "They were another race that bordered Argiv, in the mountains. We traded with them for metal and then discovered they were trading with Mishra as well." "You killed them," said Titania, in a language clear and understandable to Harbin's ears. "Your people killed the Sardian dwarves. Few survive, as slaves or exiles, but their mines have been plundered and their halls are now warrens for goblins. Is this the fate of your allies?" Even in rage, even speaking his own language, her voice was beautiful. Harbin stammered, and said, "I was only a youth at the time, but—" "And Yatia," said Titania. "Your mother is Yatian, human. How has that nation fared as an ally? Is not its northern border a sheet of fused sand and black glass?" "That is not my father's fault," said Harbin hotly. "It was Mishra who did that." Titania did not listen. Instead, she tilted her head, as if listening to music that no one else could hear. Then the queen of the elves stiffened in her chair and screamed. Harbin took a step back, along with most of the court. The queen's face was contorted, and Harbin could see parts of her wooden mask splinter as she screamed. Leaves fell from her vine-covered dress and grassy tendrils spun out of control. She twisted once in her chair and was still. Harbin was suddenly very much aware of where he was, deep in the heart of unknown territory. Surrounded by beings who had fought his work since its inception. Protected from them only by the word of their monarch, who had just screamed in pain as he yelled at her. Harbin did not turn around, but he imagined every elf, centaur, and pixie in the forested vault was drawing his weapon. But as quick as Titania's attack came on, it passed. The queen stirred and collected herself, and Harbin saw that her green garments were regrowing themselves. Yet when she looked at him, Harbin saw that her eyes were deep, tired pools, and she suddenly seemed worn and haggard. "You and the other invaders stink," she said simply and quietly. "You smell of metal and machine oil. Both sides despoil our land, and both sides will be driven out. Argith is not yours, child of the artificer. It belongs to neither your father nor to his brother. Go now. Tell the other humans this message, leave now or be driven from our shores." Titania lowered her head. The speaker said, "This audience is over." Harbin wanted to press his point, to warn Titania further of the danger of Mishra, but her mannequin was already unraveling, the vines and grasses pulling away from the form, rotting as they separated. Finally all that lay on the throne was a jade mask. "You will be protected as long as you remain within our lands," said the speaker. "Now you must go." Harbin and the two other pilots were escorted from the halls, Harbin walking alongside the speaker. There were so many questions here, so much said and not said. He had failed in that the Argivians needed the wood and ore and he could not get permission. But he knew that permission would never come from this strange queen. What device did she use to animate her puppet? And was she present, even now, watching them? There was another human face in the crowd, his face grim and angry. Harbin thought of the brown-robed men and asked the speaker, "There are men here?" The speaker nodded but did not lose a stride. "There are. But they are no friends of yours, artifice child. They hate artifacts and all devices and fled to our isle to escape them years ago." Harbin thought for a moment and said, "That is how you know about Urza and Mishra, then. They are refugees from the mainland." The speaker smiled. "The druids of Sitanul came here centuries ago, child of the machine maker. But you said they hated artifacts. Do you think," said the speaker, "that yours is the first empire to rely on the tyranny of the machine? Or the last?" When Harbin did not answer, the speaker asked, "Why did you bring your flying devices here?" "The ornithopters." Harbin said. "It was the quickest way. And it would not harm your precious woods." "It was a show of power," said the speaker. Harbin felt embarrassed. The speaker was correct. But after seeing what the queen could do, he did not feel particularly powerful. "Yes, it was," said the speaker smoothly. "A small show of power. Now allow us a small show of power in response." They emerged in the glen where the ornithopters had landed. All 5 machines were there, as were the 2 Argivians left behind as guards. There were the elvish warriors and more of the brown-cloaked humans. The druids of Sitanul. "Observe," said the speaker, and signaled the brown-robed humans. At once the druids began a chant. It was a low chant, almost felt in the bones more than heard through the ears, and it used the language the speaker had employed when he spoke to Titania. Their voices rose, then fell, then split into separate choruses, weaving and interweaving among themselves. The pilots reached for their weapons, but Harbin held up a hand to stop them. None of the elves moved. Then the ornithopters began to move of their own volition. At first Harbin thought it to be a simple breeze that caught the wings, but their wings began to unfurl to their full limits. Beyond those limits. As Harbin watched, the pulleys along the wings ripped from their grommets and the wires snapped, their sharp twangings punctuating the monks' chants. One of the pilots shouted and ran for his craft, but it was too late. The ornithopters rose like bucking horses, flapping their dying wings against the ground. For a moment, they looked like wounded, living birds. Then they crumbled in on themselves, their struts and fabric unable to withstand their own sudden animation. Where the ornithopters had been, there were now 5 piles of broken wood and hide. Already, the elves and druids were beginning to back away, disappearing into the trees. "Your show of power." "Our show of power," said the speaker. "Know that we could have done it once you were in the air, but you are under Titania's protection until you leave our lands. You have nothing to fear until you reach the lands you have despoiled." The speaker smiled, and it was a mean, self-satisfied smile. "Have a pleasant walk back, human." And he was gone as well. Mishra had moved faster than Ashnod had assumed. He was gone by the time she arrived in Zegon, gone with the invasion fleet bent on wresting the new land from Urza. Only through personal favors and equally personal threats did Ashnod gain passage on one of the supply ships following in the wake of the initial attack. She could see the new land before it appeared on the horizon. It was marked by a thick column of smoke that grew as her ship passed through the storms, a dark beacon calling her forward. The shore was a blackened wreckage of burned stumps, jutting from the ground like rotted teeth. Already the tree line had been pushed nearly to the horizon, and Mishra's factories were already assembled and working full tilt to convert those resources that survived into useful weapons. Ashnod moved among the wreckage and discovered signs that the occupation had not gone unopposed. There was a shattered hulk that had been a dragon engine not far from the docks at which she had landed, and she passed an open grave filled with the bodies of transmogrants and what looked like elves. She wanted to seek out Mishra first, but upon landing thought better of it. Mishra had banished her and might not be overjoyed to see her. Better to check with the hierarchy first. She went looking for Hajar instead. She found him, 2 miles upshore, trying to unmire a war machine that had sunk, axles deep, in a swamp. Hajar looked at Ashnod stonily, then nodded. It was a warmer welcome than she had expected. Perhaps the older man was mellowing. "You are back," he said shortly. "New horizons, new opportunities," she replied. "Any chance of getting to see his nibs?" She laid her backpack on the ground and hefted a heavy box. "I brought presents." Hajar said nothing to her but turned the bother of extricating the titanic machine over to an underling. He started walking farther up the shore, and Ashnod followed, carrying both box and backpack. Hajar offered to carry neither, and Ashnod noted there was a slight stoop in the old Philoge's shoulders as he moved. The years of watching Mishra's back were finally telling on the lean-faced bodyguard. They arrived at last at a blockhouse, a huge fortress of rough-hewn lumber and unmortared stone. It looked as if this had seen some fighting as well, for the outer walls were scorched by flame. "I take it that there have been problems," Ashnod said. Hajar nodded. "The land is occupied and must be taken, inch by inch." Ashnod nodded in turn. "Any chance of talking with the original owners?" "A leader of their people appeared here soon after we arrived," said Hajar. "A green woman, wrapped in leaves and coiled vines." "How did it go?" asked Ashnod, already knowing the answer. Hajar sighed. A small sigh, but a sigh nonetheless. "Mishra ordered the dragon engines to set her on fire. She screamed and went up like kindling. Then the attacks began again." "How is he?" she asked as they passed within the heavy gates of the blockhouse. "Mishra, I mean." "He is," said Hajar, then looked at Ashnod. She saw there was a softening in his lean visage. "And he is not. You will understand when you see him again." The throne room of the blockhouse was a rough, frontier affair, a rude dais made of slabs of stone with a captain's chair from one of the ships serving as a throne. It was flanked by 2 Jixians, one with an artificial arm, the other with a steel plate bolted to his face across the eyes. Hajar remained by the door, and Ashnod noted the pecking order had changed in her absence. There was Mishra himself. He was thinner and more muscular than he had been when last she had seen him. What mass he retained was now muscles rippling beneath his robes. His hair and beard seemed darker too. Ashnod assumed that the older man had at last surrendered to vanity and used some Zeganai ointment to hide his age. But his eyes were as alive as they had ever been, as curious and as seeking. Ashnod had forgotten that look over the years. He still had the razor-sharp Ankh of Saranth tucked in his belt, even though that land was in full rebellion. Ashnod made a mental note not to mention it, as it might still be a sore point. She set the box down and the pack next to it and prostrated herself before the artifice courtier. "I bring you greetings, O master of the desert and now master of the sea," she said, rising without waiting for him to command it. "I thought I had banished you," said Mishra grimly. "I said I would have you slain if you were found within my territories again." "So you did, most sage and just one," said Ashnod, hewing to the formal modes of address until she could discern Mishra's temperament. "And if you truly held this land, I would never choose to risk your wrath by appearing before your court. But it seems there is some doubt about that control at the moment, and I offer my aid to make this land yours." She looked at Mishra's face, seeking some smile, some recognition that he was glad to see her back. All she saw was a grim fire burning behind his eyes. "What offer of aid is this?" he said. "I have wandered far during my extended leave," said Ashnod, opening the top of the chest. "I've learned many things and found many items that may be of use to you." She pulled a copperish bowl from the chest. "I believe I can use this simple silex to determine our future," she told him with a smile, holding it aloft. Mishra did not shift position as he regarded Ashnod and her gift. "You bring me metal dishes," he said. "Have you become a coppersmith in your absence?" Ashnod lowered the bowl, disappointed. "More than just a serving dish, most powerful one. There are forces in the world beyond those of our mere machines. I have endeavored to master those forces." "Magic," interrupted Mishra. "Pardon?" asked Ashnod, startled. "Magic," repeated the courtier, "like the fools of the Union of Terrazia City believed in." "For want of a better word," began Ashnod, but Mishra cut her off. "Magic," he said a third time, "does not exist. It is all tricks, done with smoke, mirrors, and other devices. I have done such tricks. So have you, to fool the credulous. Magic is not real. Do not bother me with such trivialities." "Most comprehending one," said Ashnod, "I do not think that the power of the scholars of the ivory towers is trivial." Mishra laughed. It was a sharp, barking laugh that Ashnod did not like at all. "I never thought I would live to see the day the great and powerful Ashnod the uncaring, would become a simple trading camp charlatan, seeking to con her way back into my good graces." Ashnod felt her face redden at the rebuke. This was not going the way she had expected at all. She said, "I can offer some small demonstration." Again Mishra interrupted. "Save your demonstrations for the gullible, Ashnod. I know your patter well. And I have missed it? But I have changed in your absence, even if you have not." He looked at her, long and hard, and Ashnod, for the first time in many, many years, wondered what he was thinking. Finally Mishra said, "You are welcome to remain with my forces, Ashnod, or go as you see fit. I lift your banishment. But know that your actions will be watched." There was a slight bob of his head toward one of the priests. "If there is any sign of betrayal, I will personally turn you into a transmogrant. Am I clear?" "As glass," said Ashnod, frowning. "But may we at least speak in less formal surroundings?" "You will come when I call," said Mishra, "or you will not come at all. You are brilliant in your own way, Ashnod, and I am sure that, returned to true work, to building artifacts, your talent will blossom again. You may go." Ashnod hesitated a moment, and Mishra said again, "You may go." There was granite in his voice. Ashnod bowed again, and retreated from the room. Hajar followed her. "Well, that went badly enough," she said, then turned to Hajar. "Things have gone downhill around here while I was gone." "It has been so noted," said Hajar simply. Ashnod wanted to ask more, to find out how influential the Jixians were, who really ran things behind Mishra's throne, when the door behind them opened. The priest with the steel-plated eyes emerged and bowed, slight and perfunctory, before Ashnod. "We are interested in your bowl," said the priest. "That trivial piece of magic," said Ashnod, raising an eyebrow, "magic your lord does not believe in." The priest bowed again, and Ashnod swore she heard something click and whine as he did so. The Brotherhood is always open to new avenues, and, if they prove true, can present them properly to his most august and serene personage. The bowl, please." "I think not," said Ashnod. The priest stared at her, if an eyeless thing could be said to stare at anyone. "We have been charged with keeping an eye on you, former apprentice. We have Mishra's ear, and we can be your best allies in his court." He smiled, and every other tooth was missing. Or your worst enemies. The bowl, please. Ashnod looked at Hajar, and said, is this the way of the court, now, where petty muggings are common in its halls? Hajar did not say anything. Or rather, he looked at the floor beneath them, and his look spoke volumes. I see, Ashnod said, and handed the chest over to the priest. Please accept this gift as a token of my appreciation, she said through clenched teeth. May there be someone present to administer aid when you choke on it. The priest took the chest and gave her another toothy smile. We knew you would show wisdom, he said, once the situation was made clear to you. And he was gone, back into Mishra's throne room. Hajar did not say anything after that, but he did not have to. He escorted Ashnod to a tent city where most of the court was camped. She would have a private tent, and, as the courtier had directed, the permission to come and go as she pleased. If she needed anything, she should ask him. And then he was gone as well. Ashnod lowered herself on her bunk and shook her head. She had returned, but it was not the return of the prodigal that she had hoped for. And Hajar was right. Mishra was both very much as she remembered him and very different. She wondered if she should stay and decided that she should check out where else she could run before bolting. She pulled her backpack onto the bunk and opened it, pulling the Golgothian silex from its depths, still wrapped in her clothing. Mishra had been right about one thing, of course. She had become a coppersmith in the years that she was gone. She had become many other things as well. But she had remained a suspicious enough person to bring the duplicate of her own crafting to present to Mishra. It was Ashnod's silex that the priests of Jix now held, while she retained the original. Ashnod ran her finger along the edge of the ancient, rune-etched bowl, and the light dimmed slightly around her.